Welcome to Reflections. I'm your host, Patrick Tomlinson. And today we have another exciting guest in the person of Jairo Guzman. Jairo is president of the Mexican Coalition for Empowerment of Youth and Families. Jairo is of Mexican um, extraction. He received his early education at New York City Technical College and the Bronx Community College. Jairo received his Bachelor's of Arts degree. He had a dual major in both psychology and Spanish from Canisius College in Buffalo, New York. Jairo sits on many boards, and I am pleased to welcome Mr. Jairo Guzman to Reflections. Welcome, Jairo.
Well, thank you, Patrick. Thank you for inviting me to be part of your program. And I'm excited that many of our residents in the Bronx will be able to learn more about the organization I lead and some of the stuff that I've lived personally that I think have shaped who I am and the work that I do.
Okay, excellent. So, Jairo, let's start with where were you born?
I'm actually Mexican, born in Mexico, Puebla, the town of Atlisco, Puebla. And Atlisco is a small town in the state of Puebla that is about 50 miles southeast of Mexico City.
Okay,
And I was brought here in 1978. So I would, as much as I say I'm Mexican, I've lived a greater part of my life in New York City than in Mexico, though I do consider myself very much Mexican.
okay. Now, Jairo, you have sat on many boards. You have been involved in um, many different endeavors as it relates to the Mexican and the Hispanic slash Latino, Latinx community. And you currently are the president of the Mexican Coalition for Empowerment of Youth and Families. But let us go back a bit and tell us a little bit about your days, your college days, your high school days, and some of the things that influenced you.
Well, I think, looking back at who I am and what I am today, a great deal of who I am, it's owed to my mother. My mother was a single mom who managed to bring from Mexico six of us. I have five sisters, and she brought us, irregularly to the United States. She sent for a lady to go and pick us up in our town and bring us across the borders. She snuck us in. And in 1986, through amnesty, we were able to regulate our status in the United States. And since, did a lot of the work that needed to be done. And again, I mentioned my mom as being one of the persons that I know who has the strongest work ethic around that. I know all the women with such strong ethic and conviction of making sure that her children and family got everything that they needed to get in order for them to succeed. And along the way, I was able to meet other friends who were very much father figures who also shaped who I turned out to be. I went to a small Jesuit school. I was lucky enough to from grammar school to go to a school named Nativity Mission Center, which had, I think at that time it had a total of 46 students, 48 students in the entire school. So I was privileged to be able to attend the school where eight students were my classmates for my grades. And those were the students who followed me from seventh to eighth grade in the Lower East Side back in the 80s, when the Lower East Side was the center of the drug world for New York City. I mean, there was crime all over the place, muggings, rapings, and murder just at any corner. And Nativity was a haven for us, and managed to do exceptionally well, and went to Fordham Prep, where I did a year there, and found that I was quite different. I did not know discrimination and all the prejudice that might exist until I went to high school. and discovered that there was something called a mall, and I had no idea what a mall was. Discovered that I had to wear a blazer, and had no idea what a blazer was. Having to still struggle with learning English, and from there I went to Xavier High School, which is on in Manhattan, and again continued to make exceptional friends. I had two persons who influenced my life greatly. A person by the name of Jim Lee, who's passed, but he truly influenced my life in a way that I think was profound. He used to hire me to go and fix things at his home, and so after school and on weekends, I would go to his house and help him clean, paint, and fix things around the house. And everything I did, he would label, cleaned by Jairo the Great, painted by Jairo the Great, and that gave me a sense of being great. And at school I had a priest, till this date I still meet and see regularly. He is he's more than a friend, he's practically family. His name is Bill Kane, and he also never gave up on me. He encouraged me to go to school when I had doubts. When I went to Fordham Prep and discovered that I wasn't as smart as I thought I was, I told him I wanted to drop out of high school, and he refused to let me drop out of high school. He insisted that I needed to graduate high school no matter what. And I recall him studying with me every Sunday. I would meet up with him at Nativity Missions School, and together we would do my homework, right? He would be sitting there across the table, making sure that I was able to read the stories that I needed to read, the books that I needed to read, writing the essays that I was struggling, and him reviewing and suggesting what words needed to be fixed, how grammar structures needed to be adhered to. And until this date, we're friends. He was I my many of my friends did not make it to college, and I thought it was important for me to follow my friends and be like them. And so I had doubts about going to college, and it was Father Kane and Mr. Lee who said, "Look, go to college 1 year, give it your best, and if after 1 year you decide that it's not for you, then drop out. But you got to give it 1 year." And they sent me to Buffalo. I went to Canisius College up in Buffalo, another Jesuit school, and discovered that college was wonderful. I discovered that I had leadership skills that I was not aware of, but discovered that those leadership skills came from my mother and from Mr. Lee and from Father Kane, who truly taught me that I could lead, that I could be someone that folks could be uh, help to go a specific way, and that if we hear and try and not give up, that we could actually come out ahead. And so I went up to Buffalo, and then when I came back and graduated, and trust me, I did not want to graduate. I remember writing to Father Kane, telling him a couple of times, "Father, I'm so dangerously close to graduating and I don't want." But ultimately I was asked to graduate and leave Canisius College and return to New York City, where I wanted to be. I actually wanted to go into business. I applied to go to work for Xerox, and I applied to go to work at a small agency, a social service agency. And I went to both interviews, and I it is my impression that I did well. I remember I went on a Monday. On Friday, I got a call from the Lower East Side Family Union where they offered me a job, and so I was desperate to get to work. My mom was still very much struggling to keep an apartment together, to make sure that all the bills were getting paid, and me going back to the apartment was an added burden. So I wanted to make sure that I started work. So I accepted the job at the Lower East Side. On Monday, Xerox called to offer the job. Had Xerox called on Friday, I would be telling a different story. But
Okay.
but it was actually a Lesbia, the Lower East Side Family Union, who called. And since I've been in social services.
Okay. Excellent. I want to take us back though, Jairo, to your earlier years in Mexico for you to sort of enlighten us and give us a little bit about the sociology of that situation where you grew up in. Because I was reading yesterday that there are two major ethnic groups, but there are at least 64 others, and there might be more. So, and each region is different and unique. So I wanted to ask you to take us a little bit on that journey.
Well, absolutely. Again, I mentioned that I was born in Atlisco, Puebla. It's in Atlisco, Puebla now is one of the better states in of Mexico. That said, back then, my mother and my father struggled very much to make sure that we had a roof over our head, that we had food on a daily basis, and that we had clothes. And that became a major, major challenge. There were six of us, and five of us were, were born at home, and my sister, my oldest sister, was born at the hospital. Until this day, she's often quick to say, "Hey guys, I'm the one who was born in the hospital, not you guys," kind of a thing. But we were poor, and my father ultimately wound up coming to the United States because he did not find a job in Mexico that would be able to keep the family together. He worked as a in construction, uh, and it would be more like a laborer here, where they are, always looking for a gig that he could do, whether it was painting or putting together a wall or something, but not enough to be able to keep a family together with regard to paying the bills. And that included my mom would be, she used to do, she used to wash clothes at home, and we did not have a washing machine. So washing clothing for other people back then meant
That's in
literally
Mexico.
in Mexico.
Okay, okay.
It meant to literally bring the clothes to the house and add a sink, scrub and wash, and make sure that those clothes were cleaned so that you could have more work the next day, right? And it was a major, major struggle.
Okay.
When my mom left, my father left, and after 2 years, he forgot um, that we were home, that we were back in Mexico. So my mom came to the United States looking for him, and found that he had remarried and established another family.
Well,
So, so then my mom continued to work, and then she ultimately sent for us. She left us with my grandmother, and a lady there who would then take care of us. And my sister, my older sister, actually became our mother figure. My sister Aurora is 1 year older, but it was actually she who um, who acted as mom. My youngest sister Liliana, um, grew up calling her mom.
okay,
It was an interesting situation for us to be in, and it took a lot of courage for my mom to be able to leave us there, right? Nowadays when I ask her, would she do it again, and she says she wouldn't do it again. You
okay,
know, yeah, she wouldn't do it again.
okay. I wanted to ask you, Jairo. We had a discussion prior to coming on the program where you were telling me um, about some of these major ethnic groups in Mexico and the languages they speak. And you're telling me that there are quite a lot of Mexicans who are not functionally or do not functionally speak Spanish. Um, can you expand on that a little bit for us?
Sure. Again, there are many areas in Mexico where there are still very many Mexicans whose language is not Spanish. We got to remember that Mexico was a country that was built by native Indians of Mexico, the Aztecs, the Mayans, the Toltecas. There were so many other ethnicities that called Mexico home before the Spaniards. And till this date, we have many populations, many communities that do not speak Spanish, whose first language is another indigenous language. And so in New York City, it's interesting that New York City has not recognized the richness it has with regard to the number of persons who come from countries like Mexico, like Guatemala, Honduras, Ecuador, Peru, whose first language is not Spanish, and struggle with the language in their native country and here. And because of that
Okay.
language, they have experienced much discrimination. But in New York City, for example, Mixteco, Nahuatl, Tlapaneco are some of the more common languages here. And that's in part because many of the persons who come from to New York City, to New York State, the region, are from specific regions also in Mexico. So most of the Mexicans in New York City are either from the state of Puebla, the state of Oaxaca, or the state of Guerrero. And from the southern part of Puebla, the northern part of Oaxaca and Guerrero, it's where an area called the Mixteca, and that's where most of the Mexicans who live in New York City are from. And these regions have a large population of indigenous peoples, and therefore their primary language, their first language, is one of these languages. And when they come here, they struggle. Not only do they not speak Spanish, they don't speak English, so they're twice as much disconnected, twice as much vulnerable as other immigrants would be, and in part is because of the language.
Okay, let me ask you a quick question, Jairo. Would a Nahati, somebody who speaks or is from the Nahati tribe, Nahati group, indigenous group, be able to understand somebody from the Zapoteco or the Mixteco?
No, no. The languages are very much distinct, with the exception of the Mixteco language. The Mixteco language has um, two variations. They have a Mixteco alto and Mixteco bajo, right? And depending who you speak of either one, they will tell you that one is the original versus the other. But the languages are very much distinct, and they will not be able to understand one another if they were to be put in the same room and expected to communicate. Tlapaneco is very much different from Nahuatl, and Nahuatl is very much different from
Okay, the
Mixteco.
verbs, the pronouns, the adjectives are all different.
Correct.
So they are
Correct.
non, they're pretty distinguishable.
They're very much distinguishable.
Okay.
And the challenge for many of our people here also is that some of these languages do not have they're a written they don't
There's
have
no
an
written script.
extensive, right, they don't have an extensive written language.
Okay.
And
Okay.
for those that do, they don't also have there's very low literacy rates among some indigenous peoples, and therefore being able to write and read in an indigenous language becomes a challenge. It's for many of these communities, they're poor, the infrastructure is not there, in structural racism, classism that is recognizable in Mexico to this date exists, and thus it keeps so many people out of what they should be attending, schools. And therefore many of these persons do not learn how to read or write in their native language. And they don't learn to read and write, some of them in Spanish either.
Right.
They,
Because if you can't learn read your native language, it's difficult to learn read and write in Spanish or any other language.
or any other language, certainly, yes. In order for someone to acquire a new language, it is important for them to be able to have their first language quite well dominated. And for them to be able to acquire it, they really need to learn how to read and write as well.
Okay. So what sort of challenges that poses uh, or pose for you at the Mexican Coalition?
Well, I mentioned with regard to the fact that Spanish is not the primary language for so many of these people, right? uh, at the Mexican Coalition, we don't only see Mexicans, we see also persons from Honduras. And for them, Garifuna is one of their major languages. We see people from Guatemala, and there you have people who speak Quiche, Quechua, Mam, other languages that are just as individual. And here are people who are most vulnerable, who have been told that coming to the United States was going to be their ticket out of poverty. And they come under the impression that the money will be easy to get and the people would be nice, and the reality is different. For many of the Mexican community has one of the highest employment rates, but they have also the highest level of poverty with regard to income. And a great deal of that has to do because they do not know how to navigate the system. They do not know their rights, and so communicating to them what their rights are, communicating to them how to navigate several of the support systems that New York City has. And even though it's a sanctuary city, there are still many structures in place that are against them and people who look like me, right?
Okay.
Structural racism is very much alive. And so the work at the Mexican Coalition is to help bring some of these structures down and build the people that we're serving.
Okay, excellent. Well, we'll get into a little bit of that in the second part of this interview. But what you have stated to us is very, very fascinating. I wanted to also ask you quickly, Jairo, about the interaction between indigenous, um, quote unquote, groups in the United States. And for example, I was sharing with you something that I was observing on the TV or watching on the TV about some of the Cherokee nations being actually identifiable in areas of Mexico.
Right. Well, again, I think when the United States went through some of this some a similar experience as in Mexico with regard to just getting rid of the Native Americans, right? And so you had many Native Americans who were forced to leave the United States, and some of them went south to Mexico, others went north to Canada, and so now, because of some of the work that has been going on with many of the advocates and the indigenous community, the Native American here, the United States has actually created an act where if a person is able to trace their lineage to one of the Native American peoples here, to one of the Native American nations of the
And
United
how many
States.
are these roughly?
I'm sorry?
How many are these roughly?
I don't have there isn't exact numbers, but roughly I would say about 150 to 250,000 persons, right?
Okay.
So it is a sizable number.
Mhm.
But to be perfectly honest, and actually, and I take no shame in saying it because it's not my system, but the United States has failed miserably in tracking and keeping data that would be able to give us real numbers with regard to the indigenous community. They've been tracking how many Latinos, they've been tracking how many Afro Americans, they've been tracking how many whites, they've been tracking all these other data, but they haven't been able to track the persons who have every right to be in the United States. They have not been able to keep record of what is their status right now with regard to are they living well, any of the many ills of our society are completely being ignored for the indigenous community, and that includes the Native Americans. So again, there's a lot of room for us to be able to fix what needs to be fixed.
Okay. So where is this artificial line, or how is that drawn between Native Americans, quote unquote, and indigenous Mexicans?
Well, the challenge here is that for Native Americans from the South, from Mexico, Central America, and South America, they do not consider themselves Native Americans. They do not see themselves as being part of the United States. They do, however, see themselves being American with regard to only being one America. And that's the whole Western Hemisphere, right? That's the United States, that's Canada, that's Mexico.
Alaska,
Yep.
the Terra del Fuego.
Yes, yes, yes. But again, I think there is still an invisible barrier that keeps all these nations from coming together and be the force they are.
Okay. Okay. So now, Harry, you have your hands full, I would believe, because there's so many issues. There's so many so many things on the plate at the forefront of issues that face the Mexican, and not only the Mexican community, but the whole, for want of a better term, the Latin American community. Some of which we'll go into later, as it relates to the organizations that you're a member of and a part of. But we have a few minutes left. I just wanted to ask you to take 2 or 3 minutes to summarize for us um, your your things that brought you to this point, and we look a little bit more intently at your organizations?
Sure. Well, again, my Jesuit background, and particularly Nativity Mission, there was a saying on the halls of that school that said, "You got, to be in service of another man, be a man of service." And ultimately, that's what it is. When I came back to the Lower East Side from Buffalo, I had the choice whether to be part of the solution or part of the problem. And seeing who were my mentors, Mr. Lee, Father Kane, seeing who were the heroes in my life, my mom, right, with regard to all of these things that were happening in the neighborhood. I'm glad the Xerox called on Monday and not on Friday, because I was able to then be in a position of service. And I've been very, very privileged to be able to be of service, that actually people trust me to come and ask for help, to be in their most vulnerable moments in a point where I can actually sit down and lend an ear, lend a hand, be there to be able to support. And I think that's what started me on a wonderful journey of service.
Excellent, excellent. Um, Curiously, over the weekend I was looking at the passing out parade at Sandhurst Military College in England, and I think one of their mottos is "Serve to Lead," and I think you have embodied that, Jairo, and you have a fascinating story. You have devoted your life to the upliftment of your fellow man, I would say, and I want to congratulate you and thank you. And I also want to ask my viewers to stay back with us when we'll drill a little bit more deeply with Jairo Guzman, who is president of the Mexican Coalition. He says, as it says, for empowerment of youth and families, which is very strong. Thank you so much again, Jairo, and look forward to seeing you soon again.
Well, thank you, Patrick. It's been a wonderful pleasure to be able to speak with you, and certainly an honor to have your audience listen to me.
Thank you so much, Jairo.
COVID-19 has changed how we spend weekends with the girls. Now it's time to take the first step that lets us get back to brunching instead of late night munching. Before we can safely come together, we need the facts. As COVID-19 vaccines become available, you may have questions.
Should I get it? Is it safe? Should I wait?
It's okay to have questions. Now get the facts at getvaccineanswers.org so you can make an informed decision when vaccines are available to you.
You care for the house, the kids, and our future. My Shiro's Day is never done. So let's save a little more now so we can create the retirement we want. A free 3-minute can give us the personalized tips we need. Visit aceyourretirement.org